Hey Cliff, thank you so much for sticking around for my Patreons. I want you to take it away because you have some interesting things that you want to talk about. So go ahead.
Okay. So as we were discussing with Cozy Rev, he's a astrophysicist. He's looking at the galaxies and stuff, and he discovers that he doesn't find in the universe any proof whatsoever of Newton's math being correct. And because Cozy Rev is located in Russia, he has exposure to many Hindu thinkers and many Hindu mathematicians of old that weren't necessarily available to Newton and so on. And so Cozy Rev comes up with this different appreciation for what had been called entropy. And Newton proposed that that the whole universe would eventually degrade down and settle out and would sort of die with a whimper as all the energy went out of it. And yet there's no evidence of any kind of entropy that being described like that ever existing in our universe or existing now. And in fact, what Cozy Rev found was that he was able to do a whole series of experiments that have proved, to his satisfaction and to mine, and also to the Russian scientists, that in fact entropy is created in two different ways: with a right-handed spin that spreads out, and with a left-handed spin that has a tendency to reduce back to order. And so the universe is self-correcting. And so we can think of it this way in a crude fashion. Entropy with a right-handed spin would be a dish of acetone that's evaporating. The entropy involved has the acetone atoms spreading throughout the whole room, and we'll never ever be able to get those atoms back into a liquid form in that acetone. And that entropy exists and it's out there. There's another form of entropy that they call negentropy or negative entropy that is the absorptive aspect of that, and that would be the seashore where they're crystallizing salt out of the water. Because in the process of crystallizing salt, you're taking a distributed material and you're bringing it into a rigid crystal structured order. And so as you crystallize salt, as you freeze water, as you do any number of activities, you're actually decreasing entropy in the surrounding space because you're absorbing it as you're creating order at this very quantum level. And we're talking basically quantum levels here at this point. Although as is in, so is it out, and in this case, the quantum level translates throughout all of universe. And so the negative entropy has all different kinds of interesting concepts that are involved in it. And they demonstrated year after year. Cozy Rev did these different experiments and expanded them, got to the point where he was able to reduce this down to mathematical terms. Others were able to duplicate his results because they were so wild. It was basically a challenge to prove him wrong within the Russian scientific arena. And so many people tried that they eventually proved that he was 100% correct. Now, we need to note that every single one of his experiments could be done by us and we could craft all of the same kind of equipment that he used because he didn't need to use very complex devices. But we do have complex devices today that you could also use to duplicate the results of these. But unlike Western science, they estimate right now that if you were to go and take all of the peer-reviewed journals that were printed this year, or last year or any given year. But let's say that we took all of the peer-reviewed journals printed within the American science system in 2017, 70% of the experiments cited could not be replicated. 70% could not be replicated.
That's because
doesn't mean they lie, but we couldn't duplicate the results.
Well, and that's a lot of it because they're trying to push forward what would be good for them.
Correct. And then also there's a lot of bad science out there where people are doing things without taking into account some of the subtle forces that are actually in existence. And if you've never been trained in the subtle forces or even know that they exist, you're not going to necessarily know to exclude them, okay? And so now we have to deal with these subtle forces, especially with quantum computers coming online, because those are all about trying to avoid subtle forces disturbing your approach to trying to do massively parallel computing instantly, which is basically all a quantum computer is. But anyway, so Cozy Rev thinks that universe is not as Newton said. He thinks it was this way. He does experiments and he proves it. Then the Russians that followed Cozy Rev have taken it much further. And so I'm convinced there's a very large component of the Russian science slash industry that is now moving in the direction of producing Kozyrev kind of devices.
Well,
And
what
I
would
actually,
that be? Like, give an example.
well, I was just going to say, one of them I think I have is a Skinar. Okay, the Skinar Cosmodeke is an energy healing device that uses
That's cool.
multiple little pulses. It's sort of like a super advanced TENS device. Okay, TENS is just this pulsed electricity. Skinar actually samples using subtle forces, samples your body, tunes the frequency it's going to output to your body's needs, and puts it in there.
That's
Now,
kind of like what I was talking about with the nutrition system.
yes, yes. If we had something like that, it'd be like Bones's from Star Trek's
Yeah,
Tricorder. You know,
yeah,
oh yeah,
a
yeah, you're deficient
tricorder.
in this. Exactly, exactly. Oh, I'd love one of those. Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah. When you find
know.
one, get me one too,
You're
okay?
missing a little bit of iron there, buddy.
Exactly, exactly. So, so the Skinar is one of those. It actually uses some of these subtle force components. Now they invented the Skinar to keep the astronauts in space because you can't take drugs in space because the human body doesn't react the same way in space as it does down on Earth. And so drugs are potentially very deadly, especially with their interaction with the liver. And so one of the things that is really interesting about the Skinar is that ever since they've been producing these things, they've had a protocol for dealing with livers. Okay, little ways to heal your liver and so on. So I'm going to start getting into very serious
Oh,
use of the
that is
Skinar
so
for
awesome.
that. Right. And so there's all different kinds of things. And so that goes back to this far view, and it goes back to the idea of, managing well now for 160 years out when I've got my TR3 floaty thing and I'm going to go and, sail on the moons of, the moon Ganymede or something. Who knows?
Well, this is like taking Eastern medicine and putting science behind it and then saying, and merging, because we have to start merging all that energy. We know that there's a
Right.
energy within us. Now, I'm going to ask you, this is
Yeah.
big picture stuff and how this relates to that. Now, tell me if this is accurate. Energy is always constant in the universe. There's a theory. And if one area, like a social construct, so it increases in energy, they're operating at a high intensity level, very intense. It sucks energy from another area. And then as this one
I wouldn't say that
decreases,
that's accurate.
how would that, because if energy is constant and it's always
And see, that's what I'm
it's
saying. I don't
not.
think it's not constant.
Okay,
I don't
that's
think
why
energy is.
I want to get it
Okay.
into a bigger construct and understand it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So all of reality, the materium that we live in, where matter exists, is this 22 trillion times a second pulse. Okay, as the pulse moves through, or as the pulse recreates itself, it creates the materium around us. There is no such thing as a solid atom. If we actually look at the atoms, they're in fact energetic. They're just energy, moving around, and we think of the atoms as spinning, but really all we're looking at is the energy of the motion and the spin. We're not able to ever really see or interact with the particle itself. So we say that, light is both a wave and a particle, but we can never really trap the particle and do a lot with it. We can get a reaction from what we think is the particle, and we call it a photon, but nonetheless, we're dealing with it at an energetic level. So if we just assume that that's the case, that there's this pulse that comes out 22 trillion times a second, followed by a pause that's 22 trillion times a second, alternating, then we get this interesting view of universe, because universe is continually expanding. We know this. This can be measured. The reason it continues to expand is that as the pulse crosses itself repeatedly, it creates complexity. Once complexity reaches a certain level, matter is created. It's the reverse of the E equals mc squared, right? It's the reverse of that equation. And so we're creating matter as a result of energy reaching a certain level of complexity where it gets so many crosses that it condenses out as some form of an ion, some form of a very low particle level. That's the hiss that meditators hear when they get super calm. That you hear universe filling itself with all of this new matter continuously. And this so I would dispute that energy is constant in universe and would go the other way. Energy is continuing to accumulate within the materium, within this area where matter is. The energy is coming in constantly all the time. and we're reacting to that. It is not constant in any way, shape, or form, and that creation level, while steady, is irregular. So there will be variations depending on where you are. And then there's the issue of space. Okay, so you got one atom that comes on in. It brings with it the space and time it needs to exist. Well, when it comes in, the space that it is in bumps up against and becomes accreted to, but does not merge with, the space of the other atoms that already exist. So each space around each atom is entirely discrete. We can never, ever actually get one atom to touch to another atom. And when we do, we get these things that are like nuclear explosions. Okay, because we basically removed the space in order to jam the thing inside that space into the other thing. And that's where all this energy is released, because the space that we bring in is also energetic. Time, on the other hand, also brought in by that particle, merges seamlessly into the ever-present now. This is why we have locally variable, we have the universal present now. It's right now, it's the same now on Ganymede as it is in the Pleiades as it is here. Space, though, is not universal. There's different conditions for space depending on where you are within the universe, because they are basically discrete, although they're all accumulated around each other to give the illusion that the space is seamless and that molecules could flow from one space into the other. It can't happen, but that's the illusion under which we operate. Time, on the other hand, does actually merge. So when that new ion comes on in, it adds time to the universe as well.
So, okay, how does this concept work within that construct? So when the electron is going around the nucleus, it's going around, it slows down as it goes, because they've been doing experiments to find endless energy, right? To be able to tap into the energy source. And they've noticed that they've been able to show that the electron gets a zap of energy when it slows down to speed it back up. And that's how they're getting the energy from the energy source. How does that work in the construct of what you're talking about?
Okay, that's an aspect of the entropy, of the negative entropy and the if you will, the positive entropy. Okay, so this is well known. This is something that Kozyrev had postulated years back, that this must be occurring, and it is in essence, it's a form of mathematical proof that what I'm saying about the pulse is accurate. Okay.
Yeah, because if it didn't do that, we wouldn't have matter.
Correct. It would just degrade and fade away. Right. So there's something that keeps that. So it's the pulse coming back all the time. And basically what it's doing, the pause, the void in between pulses, allows us to have the illusion of movement. Okay, because our brains only work at 24 to 60 frames a second. So if the pulse is doing 22 trillion times a second, my hand can be here. And then the next time that pulse recreates my hand, it can be over here. And I will have the illusion that it has moved seamlessly from point A to point B. And in fact, it's right here at point A, and it's destroyed in the next void. And then when I move my hand, it's recreated in this new place and was never actually occupying any space in between those two spots. It's a difficult concept to wrap your head around, okay, especially since it affects our body and everything about us. In other words, it also affects our thoughts. Now, our thoughts are not happening at 22 trillion times a second, so they're being also recreated by the pulse. So you'll be in mid-thought, so to speak, or in the process of the thought. When the pulse degrades into a void or a pause and then it recreates itself, the thought continues on. So there's all these different kinds of things that go along with that. But basically what you're describing is very much what Kozyrev was attempting to come up with. Why does that occur? And his thing was, it helps to think about these things not as mini solar systems, okay, spinning around each other, but rather as just vibration, because that's really all it is. We've never seen an atom. We have devices that allow us to create a picture that is resultant from the energy that is at what we describe as an atom, but we're not really seeing the atom itself. We're seeing the energy signature presenting itself to the devices. And this is why we think of them as as particles as opposed to continuous waves of vibrating energy. But all is vibration. It's all about frequency. And now we've gotten into some interesting things. Okay, so let's take a deviation here and nip back into Cozy Rev for a second. It's possible using very simple devices, very simple mechanical kinds of systems to build, and I'm going to probably write it up, whether I release it open source or patent it, I just don't know yet, but I'm going to write up and design a ray gun. Okay, and this will be like a 1950s ray gun. I'll put some bloops in it in plastic so it'll look cool
Like
and all of
Flash
that.
Gordon?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'm going to do that kind of thing. And it's basically using Cozy Rev's math. And it'll have a switch on it so it can generate entropy or it can generate negative entropy. And you can magnify these kind of things. Cozy Rev was a practical kind of fellow. So he said, if this energy actually exists this way, then what can we do with it? How can we use it? Well, the Russians have taken, since Cozy Rev's death, have taken it even further. And you now have people that have been able to analyze and measure the speed, for instance. So the speed of this non-subtle, or of this subtle force that's not electromagnetic, is 1 billion times faster than light. It also has the ability to be used as a communication vehicle. So they can have
Instantaneous communication across the universe.
Uncrackable, and distance does not matter. Correct. So that'd be really cool, right? Something that would certainly be worth having. So there's all kinds of practical reasons to explore some of these interesting woo ideas. Now, Cozy Rev's ideas are easily understood once you get it out of the Russian and get it into your native language. And you can see that, oh, well, look, some of the things he said here in terms of how magnets work and how some of these materials work. So interestingly enough, we found out that you can affect entropy with cling film. Okay, you can affect entropy with magnets. You can affect entropy with aluminum. Aluminum reduces the amount of the energy that flows through it in these entropy fashions by 50%. If you take cling film, you can polarize the energy because only one form of energy can go through cling film because it's a polymer. At the time it was made, all the atoms laid over a particular way based on the heating process as this stuff became a sheet of cling film. And so you can put cling film across it and reduce the destruction. So here's a real practical thing for you then. Entropy, the degradation of energy out into space, is better controlled in your refrigerator with 2 layers of cling film put 90 degrees to each other. It'll make stuff last longer in your refrigerator. Why is this? Yeah. Because the entropy will be polarized. So each layer of polarization being at 90 degrees to each other will block out much more of the entropy action that's affecting that food.
So it won't let you mess around with it. Won't let you degrade the atoms and won't break down the food.
Exactly. That as fast as is normal. Cling film is not 100%. Yeah. You're still going to get stuff going through it. But so there's all kinds of practical
There's more ways to do it versus just cold.
Correct. And how much of the cold is going to be augmented by the cling film, right? In terms of we can also
you could have, not to interrupt you, but you could essentially have a room temperature thing using those films. You don't need that Freon.
To some extent, correct. And that's what they're exploring now, is could you have the effects of refrigeration without attempting to chill the air? That's how refrigerators work, by the way, is we take water out of the air and we use evaporation to remove heat. Most refrigerators, most air conditioners are only able to deal with about a 15 degrees Fahrenheit temperature difference over ambient anyway. As it gets to be 80 degrees, your refrigerator is going to be a constantly warmer temperature than if it were 60 degrees in that room. And it's going to have to work harder to try and maintain that temperature. There's all different kinds of things we can do just to refrigeration and food preservation, knowing some of the things that Cozy Rev
Isn't that interesting?
Came up with, right?
Okay, yeah. Well, let me ask you about the Russians versus the U.S. scientists. Are we even looking at that science? I mean, I know the University of Colorado is with that energy source, and there's different pockets. But as a country at large, are we taking this stuff seriously like they are?
No. We've we've abandoned. Or there has been an agenda influencing Western academia and thus Western science, and that agenda has been in place since the late 1890s, is easily ascertained, and maybe even earlier than that. And we have evidence of it, such as Tesla's life and how he was treated, all of these different kinds of demonstrable things that show that, shit ain't right. We're not doing things correctly if our social order provides this kind of information to it, and the reaction is so overwhelmingly negative. So there is an agenda to force a particular universal view on us and keep us in a rigid mindset that doesn't allow us to even examine these ideas because they're very disruptive. I mean, if you and I could have an uncrackable communication vehicle, the government they'd be running around shitting the sharp stones here constantly. Oh my God, what's Sarah talking to Clif about? Oh my God, we can't crack it. We can't find out. Who knows what they're going to hatch, right? And the government would just lose it. And if we could have communication that was not only uncrackable, but was 1 billion times faster than light, so that we would have, around the globe transmission instantly like that, imagine just that level of benefit. But all of these, the government is afraid of weaponization of these things, right? And so we have the idea of energy weapons that are in the hands of the deep state, but what they fail to realize is the information is already out there, and it doesn't take this digital approach to create these. Let's also bear in mind something here, okay, that needs to be stated because it's obvious to me, but most people just sort of glance over it. Kozyrev did all of his work post-Gulag with analog devices. He used no digital means whatsoever. There was no programming involved. You made these things out of simple arrangements of various different kinds of material. All of the experiments were done in an analog fashion. That means anybody that had the information and had the concept the way I've got it could indeed create one of these negative or positive entropy generation devices, right? And so maybe the government is, especially in the form of, El Presidente, the dictator, is afraid of someone developing weaponizing such a thing, and so they could be able to go to a rally or something and stand in the back of the room and aim their little invisible ray gun, and the dictator ages, rapidly on stage because he got hit by massive amounts of entropy because they developed their gun to do that. And so they're afraid of all of these kind of side benefits for humans of the subtle forces and how they work. Some of those things include anti-gravity. The anti-gravity. Now here, let's look at this, all right? It's all vibration. The whole universe is vibration. Years ago, there was this guy by the name of Bob Lazar that came on out and said he'd worked for Area 51 and had been involved in reverse engineering some spaceships. He gave some very interesting information that was corroborated. Everybody thought he was full of shit. But he gave some a few nuggets, very interesting information out there. And they turned out to be validated years later. So 15 years after he mentioned it, we discover element 115. All right. And he described the basically it was an analog system that created anti-gravity in the alien spaceships. And what it was a short series of tubes that allowed this element 115 to be bombarded with single particles at a time. So it was a little tiny CERN. And what was actually happening was the element 115 is sitting up here vibrating like mad. Let's just call it spinning, because we're going to think of it as an atom that's sitting there spinning. And it's sitting up here spinning in this chamber. And you would use a short tube, which is your waveguide, to shoot up a particle that would wrap around the top of the 115, intrude into its space and time, and cause the element 115 to interact, taking the whole spaceship out of time and allowing you to drive it to some other spot. And and that's how it created the anti-gravity, was the wave that came from element 115 as that particle crossed over it. And this is as I say, if you had element 115, it's going to sit there and spin anyway. You don't have to do anything about it, right? You just have it in a place that you can bombard it with little tiny particles. And you can create your own anti-gravity device or travel outside of time. It's not time travel. You can't go back into the past or into the future, but you could travel from here to the Pleiades
instantaneously almost.
Correct. Right. Almost.
Well, let me ask you, during when the Germany was cut off, and it was East and West Germany. East Germany really didn't go anywhere. Their car that they created was a famous example, right? I mean, they were far behind us. And it was because they cut people off and it was only the government that could do stuff. Well, we're kind of in that scenario now where they're cutting us off. The internet's allowing us to get more of that out, but it's been like that for a long time. But if the Russians and these other people are not being cut off, how much farther ahead? I mean, are we in an East Germany kind of?
Correct. And you hit on it. I lived in Germany when East Germany was there, and I was in East Germany a number of times, East Berlin and the whole thing, right? Before and after the Berlin Wall. And the issue is the government only had resources to control the people. And they devoted all their resources to controlling the people so that the people in power could maintain their power. That's where we are at now. The deep state is increasingly putting its energy into trying to control the population such that they don't have the energy to try anything else. So it's truly an issue of freedom, intellectual as well as physical and social and economic and political freedom. The more free your society is, the fewer restraints you have on it, the more free your mind is going to be to explore these kinds of ideas, the further ahead you will be. I suspect that in the acknowledged programs that I can find with Russian search engines and stuff, in the acknowledged programs in Russia, they're at least 30 years, if not 40 or 50 years ahead of us in Cozy Rev science. You don't see Skinars being produced here in the US, right? And they're just truly remarkable devices. You can get I had a very damaged ankle here the other day because the dogs yanked me at a particular time and it got all swollen up. And with a Skinar, I'm healed up in 2 days. And who knows how long that would have taken those tendons and stuff to heal up without it. And of course, C60 and all these other things also contribute. But so recovery time is so much faster when you take this new view, this far view of what's going on. So if the Russians are that far ahead in the acknowledged world, and look at what's been going on. We've had mysterious, unexplained by our powers that be, impacts of something on our military. Number of boats crashed into each other where they shouldn't have. We had Russian jets fly over our aircraft carriers or our Navy, and that whole vessel loses all electromagnetics all at once, instantly. And no explanation as to how that occurred, what was going on. They're totally isolated, and the Russians are just flip a switch and they do it. Well, they're using Cozy Rev's subtle forces approach to doing these things. And so in their military, I suspect they might be another 60 or 80 years ahead of us in using some of these kind of devices. I do know that there's an interesting series of Russian discussions that one can find that would suggest that they're not going to be worried about any laser produced by the United States in any form of a laser cannon on a boat, on an airplane, because now the idea is they're going to have like C-130 planes that'll have these big laser cannons. How they're going to get the electricity, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. But the Russians aren't concerned with it at all. The reason they're not concerned about facing those kind of devices is because like 20 years ago, they developed a way using some of Cozy Rev's understanding to disrupt lasers at its source.
Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so let me ask you. We kind of laugh at the hermit kingdom, North Korea, and we think they're all backwards and whatever. People are starting to look at the United States that way, like we're kind of a hermit environment, and that we are totally cut off and clueless. What will it take for our people to wake up and realize that we're so far behind the rest of the world on medicine and science in so many areas?
That's a difficult question to answer, okay? Because I see so many similarities between the United States now and Germany after it had been bombed into rubble in the early 60s, okay? When I went to Germany, it was in terrible, terrible shape. And I was there during the Great Reformation, the 10-year effort to rebuild Germany and stuff. This was a monocultural to a certain extent. There were a lot of Turks that were brought in, but the Turks had the same work ethic as the Germans, all right, at that time. And the Turk population, the young Turks, actually rebuilt much of Germany at an industrial level. They were the actual workforce. But the Germans were determined to overcome their limitations, having been bombed into rubble. They had it lying around them all the time. We're in a situation where everything is just simply degrading around us. It's not being bombed to where you can't ignore it, right? Where you have to walk around the bridge that used to be there 20 miles to go get water. That's going to make you change stuff right away. So how soon it will be, I don't know. But I think that we are at the same level as Japan and Germany after the war, without the benefit of the sudden shock of it all, which, admittedly the war was 10 years, but, we might have to go another 40 years of degradation before.
Well, there has to be, because people think that we're better than everyone. They still,
Right,
the average
right.
idea is that we're way advanced to everybody else when that's not accurate.
That's because they allow their schooling to get in the way of their education. The two are entirely different. When someone tells me they've been educated, I say, do you have a degree in anything? And they say, oh yeah, I got this, that, and the other. And I say, no, you're not educated, you're schooled. And there's a big difference. The difference being that to get out of school, you have to repeat back exactly to them the words they want to hear. That's how you matriculate. That's how you graduate. And that has nothing to do with education. Education is all about learning to think. It's all about learning to think critically and proactively for yourself, right? And to know things independent of someone else's opinion. So, for instance, I know the Earth is not flat because I've done the experiments where I actually measured the size of the planet. And I wasn't as accurate as others, but I nonetheless went through the whole process using sun sites in the bottom of a well and that kind of thing. And so I can validate that level of math. I know this, and I needn't worry about someone else's opinion that the Earth is flat, nor do I need to try and dissuade them of that opinion because there's no point in it, right? That's part
Some
of
of
the
those
far.
people are just so far gone. You just,
Well, yeah,
I get
that's a
them
lot of the.
too. On
Okay,
my
well, that's like a lot of the
comment board.
C60 guys, the anti-C60 guys. The
Yes.
weirdness is that the reasons that they are anti-C60. The one guy that really is kind of irritating is that he says that all the C60 molecules in your brain will saturate, they'll go to your brain, they'll form this layer, and then the deep state will be able to access that layer and use their little joysticks and make you
I
walk around and dance like an
know.
Egyptian or whatever, right? And
Yes.
it's like, wait a second, people, you don't understand. We can't program at a monomolecular level. We can't program nanomolecules. There's no such thing as nanites where you can relay instructions to a device because we're still working at the level of electromagnetism. And there's a certain limitation to the size of that, which is the electron. So if the device can't receive electrons because it's too damn small, we can't communicate with it.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
know.
it's like, so anyway,
And there's
we might
other
as well,
ways if you're really going to do it. There's
a
other,
lot easier. Yeah.
yeah, you're not going to do that.
No, 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 no. You'll put fluoride in the water.
Or some,
You
there's so many other ways to do it.
yeah,
That's
exactly,
easier and
exactly.
yeah. And not
Cheaper
something
and
that
yeah.
has this other amazing benefit at the same time.
Right, right.
Right?
So you kind of wonder about some of these, some of these different disinformation pockets within the social order. Now, I've read some stuff that you can get at from the CIA that says they're not worried about X, Y, and Z of particular kinds of things because they can always debunk it, and it doesn't matter that their debunking is false. And they're not even going to do it. What they do is there's so many people with so many opinions, they find people whose opinions harmonize with the agenda they want to promote, and then they promote that a person in subtle ways, sometimes such that that person doesn't even know they're being promoted. They just think it's a lucky streak. It was lucky that
That makes a lot
organization
of
decided
sense.
to exactly. And so the opinions are promulgated, the agenda is put forward, and the CIA is blameless. Their hands are clean of this because we can't see any connection to it at all.
Yeah, that I've been thinking about that because how come this guy's being promoted and
Right,
I start to see
right.
those patterns. You have to look
And
for
it's like
that.
the Blue Avians, okay? Why Corey Good? He's not particularly charismatic, not particularly bright, not particularly engaging, not erudite, not articulate, and yet promoted all to hell and gone. Well, he's a very good distraction for those people that they want to have distracted.
Well,
Just like,
they're purposely making it into a clown show though, because they just
right,
had that other. Do you see the recent poster where it was the Guardians of the Galaxy and they put all their faces on the actual actors? Like, oh my
I
gosh!
hadn't
Anybody
seen that.
who's a
No.
serious person doesn't want to be associated with that.
Right, right. Well, it's okay. And so there you go. It's the issue of a serious or a person of integrity. Okay, so we have to judge reality by the standards that we set up within our ethical system, right? That we were discussing in the last hour, and so we have to make certain decisions to go forward. And every time you make a decision, you close off certain areas, you close off all the other opportunities or possibilities and concentrate on that, but that opens up other ones. So let's take this weird example that exists as reality. Back last year, okay, so the personalities involved are this is Robert David Steele. I think you're familiar with him.
I'm very familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I kind of like him, you know.
I do. We can have a whole off-air conversation about all the crap he's accused of, but I don't think so.
No. He's got personal integrity. Okay.
Yes.
I know he has personal integrity because he's had to demonstrate that. Now, here's how he demonstrated it in circumstances that were the universe provided such that he could demonstrate it.
Oh, good. Okay.
All right. So there was this crew out there headed by Jason Goodman. And I've interviewed with him. I didn't know who he was. He sent me this email and said, "Hey, you must know about my channel. You want to talk?" And I'll talk to anybody. And I sent back, "Sure, I'll talk to you. I've never seen your channel, but we can chat." It was about cryptos. I wouldn't have chatted with him had I known the history of last year. Okay, because it's the same issue that Robert David Steele ran into. Mm-hmm. Jason Goodman had this cohort fellow that he was working with by the name of George Webb. And last year, I don't know the exact circumstances, but Jason Goodman and George Webb came to promote the idea that there was a dirty bomb on this boat in the North Carolina port. At least I think it was North Carolina, on the Maersk. And so like last June or July, this occurred. And there was no dirty bomb. Jason Goodman was misled. He's not particularly discriminating. He doesn't really do critical thinking, in my opinion. But he was misled, and he called on all of his followers, of which he has considerable. He's he's charismatic, he's engaging, and entertaining. So he's got people that follow him. We're all in an attention market. So the whole thing, anything you're selling anymore is getting a human's attention. And we've been able to just reduce it right down to that. It doesn't matter what you're selling. You got to sell yourself into that human's attention in order to go beyond that. So anyway, Jason Goodman is promoting the idea, and he's getting all of his followers to call the authorities, saying, "You people need to go and investigate this. There's a dirty bomb. We have reliable information that there's a dirty bomb on this boat, the Maersk." Well, they shut down the port. They searched the boat. The deep state was moved off its ass. Coast Guard was involved. Port authorities were involved, et cetera, et cetera. No dirty bomb. And the port was shut down, and as you may imagine, all kinds of economic ramifications from that point forward. Well, Robert David Steele found out about this as it was occurring, and he had been scheduled to interview with this guy and promote his unrigged. And so Robert David Steele, as a man of integrity, says, "I can't be involved with these ass clowns. They obviously don't know what they're doing, and I can't be involved with them as a person of integrity." Now, he probably didn't use those words,
well,
but that's basically he might have. You never
or
know.
a word that's equivalent.
Yeah, exactly. And so he did not. He canceled on him. And so that proves to me that just because of the motivation he used, that he didn't want to be associated with minds that were that untuned, that undisciplined, right? That they would do such a thing, that they had no concept of the ramification. Now, I personally think Jason Goodman's going to be in a world of hurt, as is George Webb. I think George Webb was arrested on this for filing a false report, right? But I'm not certain about that because I didn't dig deep enough into it. Once I discovered what was going on and it validated Robert David Steele's stuff, then I just sort of dropped it and went on with other things. But I know this much about it. But my supposition is that at some point the federal government, and they've got like 7 to 10 years to do it, is going to come back to Jason Goodman and say, you owe us $16.5 million for what you cost.
Yeah, that's expensive. You shut down a port.
Very expensive. Shut down a port. Yeah. And then all the people that were involved, the overtime, all of this, huge costs, right? And so, so there is a reason that filing a false police report is a crime. It costs the social order. And it doesn't matter if you're a YouTube personality. It doesn't matter that someone else actually phoned the Coast Guard. They did it at your behest. So you're actually involved in an active conspiracy. So it gets, anyway. But my point being that it's a matter of personal integrity and how you think. And so now with the far look, it becomes the far view of things. It becomes even more critical that we examine those people we deal with, that we examine our interactions with the social order with the idea of, in my opinion, ahimsa, do no harm. Very first thing, it's a Sanskrit word, do no harm, right? And and so now, the Jason Goodman guy, he went absolutely batshit and started calling Robert David Steele all different kinds of nasty names that were totally unwarranted. And so Robert David Steele, being a stand-up guy, said, I'm not going to come on over and knock every tooth you've got down your throat. So I'm going to have to get lawyers and sue your ass. And so he's getting lawyers and he's suing the guy, which, I hate to see anybody get into a nest of lawyers.
It's
but,
ugly.
Well,
Jason Goodman had the same problems with Jake Morphonios. It's like,
I'm unfamiliar with that. I'm sorry, I don't know about that.
do you know who Jake Morphonios is? He's just,
No.
You got to look into his stuff. You'd absolutely love him. He's just the best. It's Blackstone Intelligence. You get a chance, look into his stuff. But anyways, Jason Goodman had him on, and same sort of deal happened. And he didn't want to go on. He said, I don't want to have a debate with somebody. I want to, and so he promised him it wouldn't happen. And then he ended up having a debate with somebody. He goes, this is exactly what I told you I didn't want. And he kind of set him up on air. And it turned into a ugly situation. Yes, it was an ugly situation. And so now I'm like, wow, Jake Morphonios has so much integrity. I'm sorry, he has a ton of integrity. Anybody that watches his shows and follows him agrees with me on that.
I'll have to check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, he looks at stuff, and he's not. The deep state doesn't like him. I am sure about that. But everything he does, he researches meticulously. He used to be a fraud investigator for a big financial company, and so he knows how to do it. And but great guy. But anyways, Jason Goodman had the same problem with him as well, which is an interesting thing.
Goes to a pattern, right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And you can change, all right? Humans have to, and especially with the far view, we have to allow ourselves to change, right? So I've been through some stuff and where I am not the individual I was in the past.
Exactly.
And I expect to be far better in the future because I'm quite certain I will change and hopefully shed a lot of my inappropriate thinking as I go forward, as part of the far view, as part of the re-engineering of ourselves, right?
Because I'm not the person that I used to be, and I want, like I always say, I want to be the person I want to be. And so, what I was in the past isn't the person I want to be. And so I'm working at being, I'm not there yet.
Right,
but,
right. Well, and in this case, the goal, while extremely important, is far less important than the process.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the thing about Aikido, or martial arts or whatever, the goal of performing a particular action in a particular way, or even meditation and that kind of thing. The goal is certainly necessary to motivate you, but what's really important is that you do the work, that you do the process, because that's the actual element of change, and you're able to be a change agent within yourself. That's actually quite rare. Most humans, are trapped by the genetics, the nurture nature aspect of their mind at the time they become an adult. And so few of them ever allow themselves the opportunity to change. Oh, no, I can't do that. Deep inside it says, my father would never like that, or my mother wouldn't allow it, so I won't do that. Right. And it's very limiting, and it restructures your life. Now, maybe getting back to your point way back when, maybe our social order with the anti-aging will split. Maybe we'll bifurcate into those people that it makes sense for us to pursue it, and others that don't want to have anything to do with it and will become the short-lived. Now, maybe it will be, I don't think it will be in any way able to be organized or structured, because that will create revolution. But it may just be that a lot of people just don't ever look at it,
Because I've heard people tell me they don't want to live longer.
Correct. I've gotten a lot of that myself, right. And I understand, all right? Life is basically suffering. This is something you can appreciate when you're in your 50s, that no matter what, life is suffering. And there's a lot of suffering in life, and we all end up dying. So, wait a second. There's not like there's a happy ending, you know? And so, but on the other hand, acceptance and understanding of this situation does produce the happy ending, and you have that happy ending every single moment from that point forward. And it's the understanding and the acceptance that allow you to say, okay, this is the way of reality, and I'm going to be harmonious with the reality in which I find myself, and I will. It's sort of a cheat, okay? It's sort of a hack. In other words, one way to think about it in our current milieu is to think, I'm doing everything I can in this life to make it easier for me in my next life. So I'm gonna hack my next life by clearing up a lot of my crud in this life. So
Well,
that's
that
one
would be
benefit.
nice, wouldn't it?
Well, see, it works. It actually does work. And if you get into the yogi and the Taoists and stuff, they talk about some individuals are born into this life and they're extremely psychic. They don't have to develop it. They appear to, it's the people that are born with, what do they call them? Siddhis. Okay. That's a word for a Hindu word, a Sanskrit word meaning gift, power, ability. And so they're born with certain abilities, clairvoyance, clairaudience, future prediction, and so on. And these individuals pop up all the time. Our social order is not very geared towards spotting them. That's why you see more of a
I'm
discussion about
terrible at
this.
it.
Exactly. And you go to Malaysia, you go to Indonesia, you go to India, and you'll see a lot more discussion about these kind of things. And, oh, well, look, we know that kid's going to be a mathematical genius later on because he was born with a city for math. And you see him sitting there playing with his toys and so forth. And you see that he's naturally organizing things into sets, groups, doing math basically, analog version of
But you know
mathematic
what's so
calculation type
great
stuff.
about that is that what we do with children now is we're oblivious to it, and then so the kids that have this amazing gift when they're younger, they might get lost in the shuffle during middle school and everything else when all these other social pressures and middle school is a time where kids get lost, and
Yeah.
we might lose that whole thing, and we write them off as not being gifted in this way because they're so sidetracked with all the bullshit that they have to deal with.
We school them. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in that sense, I'm all in favor of homeschooling because no matter how bad it is, especially if it's a bad homeschooling and that mind is active, it will attempt to educate itself in spite of that. Okay, so I would have to actually sit here and count up the number of high schools I've been to, count up the number of middle schools, count up the number of primary schools I've been to because my dad was in the military and we moved all the damn time.
So
So
you
in that
really
sense.
got to see the mess.
Right, and I was schooled by any number of people from a wide range, from the really repressive people in the Leavenworth School District in Kansas to the outstanding school experience that I had in the British-run, German staffed and American financed occupation school in Germany. So, the one thing I hated about it was the British were in charge of history. So all we learned about was the goddamn royals and who shafted who as a royal and, what their jaw was like and whether they had hemophilia and all of this kind of thing. Right. And it was like, why are we studying all these sick people? And they were. It's like the Queen Elizabeth, has got so many relatives in mental institutions now, so many siblings that are, absolute batshit because they're so inbred. And yet we promote these people. So I was at least able to step outside of my schooling and realize that I had to take charge of my own education or I wasn't going to get anywhere. And then at some point I saw how terrible the schooling was and decided I don't need a degree. I will make my way without it. And I've been able to do that so far. And I anticipate continuing that in the
Well,
future.
you're very bright, and the problem in our society is some people need that freaking stripe in order to be able to allowed to do things. You know what I mean? Like you have to go get my credential in order to do this.
Right. And
That's
I'm just not a credential kind of guy.
No,
Yeah.
either am I.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It's like, oh gosh. But I look at my daughter went to this school, it's called Tesseract, which the idea was for it to be, you could jump anywhere,
Sure,
free
sure.
thinking.
No, I'm familiar with the mathematics structure of a tesseract.
Yeah. And that was the whole concept of school. She came out years ahead. And then the school had to shut down because of this whole bad situation with the economy and stuff. So she was years ahead of when she transferred to another school. And it just didn't They weren't
Yep.
able to,
Yep.
it just was nowhere near what she had
Yeah.
before. And so I'm so disappointed, in some of the things that I saw in contrast to what they were able to do. And so, yeah, I've become more and more thinking along the lines that homeschooling would have been good. The only thing is that I don't think I could have been the good homeschooling parent.
It's
That's
a lot
the
of work.
problem. There's a
Okay.
difference. There's that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a lot of work. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
So now the good news is that people that do homeschooling, if they're going to be have integrity and do it well, are going to end up educating themselves because they'll have to
Yes.
stay ahead of the kids, right?
Yes.
And that's going to put a big push under their ability to stay self-educating as they get older. And so this gets back to the far look, right? Look at what's going to happen if we all live to be 160. Well, when you get out of school in your 20s, the thing to have done will be to have learned how to educate yourself because you're going to have to do it repeatedly throughout your life as things change, right? So I may be thinking I'm going to get a second career here designing negative entropy ray guns for the use in the cheese industry, right? Because you could age cheese very fast or wine.
How cool is that?
All right.
Yeah.
And so I may be able to do that, but maybe 2 years from now, we'll have artificial intelligence that will be able to design these things far better than a human. So I'll have to re-educate myself for some other career in the future once the time alteration ray gun device area is locked up. That'll keep happening as we go forward, as society keeps getting more and more complex. So education is our business. It is the focus
Exactly.
of our lives.
Education
Right.
is the next step. We're going to get to all these other things that are changing, but the education system is what's kind of the white elephant.
No, I'm not talking about the system.
Well,
Okay,
I'm talking
that's
about
schooling.
Well,
That's
schooling. Yeah,
Right,
that
and that's
is
different.
Well, that whole thing is the elephant in the room that's just
Right.
not working.
Right. But that's not going to go away until the deep state has its
Right.
major crises.
But I
Right.
think more and more people are going to will go, wait a minute. As people age, as all this stuff happens, people are going to be like, this is not. You're seeing more and more rumblings of people saying, this
Yeah.
just isn't enough.
Doesn't work.
It's just
Yeah.
not doing what we need it to do.
Right. But see, I'm just because of the iconoclastic nature of my mind, I'm dropping out of that whole I'm just not participating in that. And I'm taking a personal responsibility to be in charge of my own education, especially during these next 40 years as shit degrades here in the US. I don't know that it'll take 40, but we're at that point where we're going to have a major commitment to re-engineering our society, to re-engineering the lawyers out of the top place and putting engineers in the top place.
Exactly.
So we've got to have a social revolution at a serious level that does not involve politicians and attorneys.
Well, and that's what I was saying. It's just there's this huge overhaul. No, but how many people will be able to get there that that are self-motivated enough to do it on their own? Do you know what I'm saying? Because
Sure.
I
But we're
do
gonna get
it.
millions.
You're pretty rare. There are all the people that listen to the show are like that. They're
Right.
searching.
It's not that rare. Okay. I think that that at least 25% of the population right now in the United States, especially given our cultural diversity, but at least 25% is in that category.
Well, that's
'Cause I meet
phenomenal.
these-
That's way enough to change this. Just change everything.
Right. Right. And hey, aren't things changing?
Oh, they really are. It's really incredible. It's an
right,
incredible
reach
time to be
critical mass.
alive.
Yeah.
They won't even
kicking
know.
and screaming and bitching and moaning, but
They won't even know what happened to them. Well,
Yeah,
as that curve,
yeah.
I draw this out for people. There's this curve. If you keep learning, you're like this. But if you don't learn on your own and keep learning, you're like this. And then there's that gap between it just keeps getting wider and wider and wider. And
Right.
pretty soon it's really hard to even relate to those people.
Oh, it can become insurmountable. It also affects, your potential economic well-being as the economy changes around you. That's a big, the big thing within our social order is to try and maintain yourself as productive, at least up to the point that you can enter retirement. And then you need to enter retirement with enough productive ability left to be able to see you through the changes that the social order is going to go through, because we know you can't count on the 1930s kind of style pension systems that have been engineered that are now all crashing. And so the social order, so we've got all these things that are converging at the same time. The demographics of our population aging, the millennial generation being the largest ever, at the same time that the pensions are crapping out, which means that there's more impetus on both the retiree and those supporting the retiree to come up with money independent of the deep state, the state's need for continuing source of largesse in order to keep people addicted to it. And all of these things are, and then at the same time, money itself is changing. And the debt structure, the debt system, the debt fiat currencies that we've been under have become so debt loaded they can't continue. And we're at that very last couple of years as they eke out just a few more days of subsistence out of them. So, by 2020, we're into sci-fi world because it will have all changed, or it will be all changing as we get into the 2020. And 2018, 19, and 20 are going to be gigantic years in terms of the amount of things that will occur as a result of that. Stock market crashes, retirement systems going under. You hear
It's
about.
going to be amazing.
Yeah, Illinois. Recently their solution to the pension funds was to make the homeowners pay for it. So they're going to add. So you got $1 million house, you have to pay an extra $10,000 a year in taxes to support the pension system. Well, it's like at that point, sell the house as rapidly as possible and start renting.
Or, yeah, exactly. Everybody just deserts and it turns into Detroit.
Right.
I mean, you got to be careful. You can't.
Right.
And that's what's
It's
happening
not
in
a solution
downtown
to pass
Chicago,
the buck.
anyways, because they're taxing the hell out of people. So a lot of people are leaving Chicago. They've had a mass exodus of people.
Yeah. Talk California, and we're just on the cusp of it up here. So we have a situation now where Amazon, major employer up here in the Pacific Northwest, and especially in Seattle, and Amazon is being hit with the idea, being promulgated by the socialist agenda being put forward within the political system for King County, that Amazon should pay $500 per year per employee, so that the county can take that $500, which is $20 million a year, so that the county can take that money and give it to homeless people. And they're going to do this to all the big employers that have over X number of employees. You got to pay $500 tax, a head tax on your employees so that we can support a homeless person. And it's like, this does not compute, people. This won't work,
It's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid versus just doing the that we need to create a thriving environment. Yes.
Correct. And you can't legislate the results for equal opportunity, right? You cannot legislate equal lifestyles for everybody. The best that a social order can do is to provide an opportunity that is in no way discriminatory, that is equal for all people to work out their own destiny.
Freedom.
And if you crap out, you crap out, and it's up to you to learn from universe, get off your butt, and go fix that, right? It's not up to the state. Exactly.
And because
freedom equals responsibility.
Yes, it does.
At a personal level.
And people don't understand that freedom and free market is not equal to capitalism. It's not what we're seeing. Free market is the most ethical environment you can have, a true free market.
Exactly. And it's self-correcting itself, and I've lived in those markets all my life because I've lived in areas where black markets existed, like in Germany in the 60s. Eastern Germany was not devoid of capitalism. It was just all underground as the people dealt with each other. They were all capitalists. They just couldn't show any of it to the government at all. And the black market existing and the drug markets existing, these are self-correcting. If you're an upstanding guy in the drug markets and you don't try and rip people off and that kind of stuff, then people are less likely to kill you. And if you're,
some of those things are more ethical than, unfortunately, the drug market, a lot of times are the most ethical markets.
Exactly. And I, people that work in these markets that are, the OGs, right? They're the original gangster kind of guys, and such individuals, they're not out flashing anything because they're solid in their appreciation of, in their integrity that allows them to stay alive. And so the view that the social order has is entirely skewed by the people presenting that view, but you're quite correct. I think it is indeed perhaps the most moral because the market is self-correcting, and you will fix that problem, or basically you'll die if that problem continues, and or your business will die in a very rapid kind of an order, this sort of a thing. So universe fixes itself. It works out very nice.
Yeah, unless you're in a drug area where they're in charge through intimidation of killing people, and then that's not a free market,
Yeah, but that only lasts a little while. Okay, it's that same issue. They're going to fight among themselves. There's a power vacuum created
if
each
you
time each
allow
one
it
kills.
to come down.
Right. And as we see, it develops so far. There's a certain amount of energy that gets into it. And like I was expressing with some other people the other day, it's all energy waves. Waves build up in height as their trough disappears. And it's when the trough goes that the wave collapses.
The foundation leaves. Yep.
Correct.
Yep.
And so when you pollute the market by your activity, the market leaves you. You don't have the support. You don't have the activity anymore.
Well, and that's why Band-Aid solutions don't work, because you're not working on the foundation. You always have to look at what are the foundational elements that make this work, and that's what we have to focus on.
Right.
Right. Well, this is amazing. This was supposed to be a short little thing for my Patrons, but I love talking to you. So it turned into this. What it'll be is a Patreon thing for a while, and then it'll go to it'll be another show. But okay. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Clif. You're so fun to talk to.
Well, thank you very much. It was very enjoyable in spite of all the sniffles.